Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Borough of Crafton regular meeting dated September 24, 2018. Call to order. Flag salute with Ms. Perry.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
All right, Mr. Lavasser,
Here.
Mr. Rosario,
Here.
Mr. Amendola, Mr. Kraus,
Here.
Ms. Damitz. Here. Ms. Glasser is. Ms. Perry.
Here.
All right. To proceed, may I have the approval of the bill list dated September 24, 2018.
So moved.
Second. Any comments, questions? All in favor?
Aye.
All that opposed? The approval of the bill list. May I have the approval of the minutes dated September 10th, 2018.
So moved.
Any questions or comments? All that approve?
Aye.
All that opposed? We have the approval of the minutes. Thank you. Moving forward, citizen comments. Do we have a citizen sign-in sheet? Thank you. At this time, citizens may address the Borough Council on any issue appearing on today's agenda. Only residents and taxpayers of the Borough of Crafton will be permitted to address the council. Comments on non-agenda items will be taken at the end of tonight's meeting. Speakers will be permitted to speak for a maximum of 3 minutes. Groups of people will be required to designate a spokesperson to represent them before the council, who may speak for a maximum of 10 minutes. Speakers are asked to use the microphone at the speaker's stand. Clearly state their name and address for the record, and keep comments brief and to the point. Please spell your name for the record. Second.
We didn't have to do it.
All right. Mr. Mangan?
We're gonna wait to the end.
Okay. Mr. Duker?
I'll wait to the end.
Okay. And Mr. Wacker, your comments will wait to the end as well. There's no items on condemnation, so we'll be moving forth with the rest of the planned agenda. Acknowledgement receipt of written reports. We have the Treasurer's Report, Financial Report, Act 511, and Trash Collection Reports, Property Tax Collection Report, Police Report, the EMS Report, the Ordinance Officer's Report, the Building Inspector Report, Code, the Public Works Report, Fire Department Report, and the Library Report.
I'll just make a comment, the ordinance, I don't see the ordinance officer, is it in there?
I'll check. There was an issue with the file. I thought they got it uploaded, but I'll double check
I
and make
wasn't
sure.
seeing the library report. It could be a sync issue, so.
Yeah, I'll look into that and make sure I figure it out by tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, she did have it with mine, the printed report.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe I library one in there.
No, code enforcement.
Okay, I'll check.
Okay.
All right, may I move forward?
Mhm.
All right. The Mayor's Report?
Just a couple quick items. One is for, I guess, for you to authorize the solicitor. Good questions about the traffic studies that were conducted for Crafton Boulevard between Steuben and Home Avenue as to how the ordinances are written, justification for the 15-mile-an-hour speed limit. I've looked at them and they're very confusing as to how they're done and when they were done. One was about one way, let's say northbound, the other one way southbound. But I was wondering if you could get the solicitor to research that and come out with a list of actually what is the current ordinance level for Crafton Boulevard and the justification for it, and whether or not that posted area is within the guidelines of the vehicle code.
Do you have any questions, Mr. Corporal?
Nope, as long as I get the handle on the ordinances that created the speed limit and the traffic engineering reports, I should be able to come to a conclusion.
All right.
And when he can, it's no big rush, but just when you get a chance to check that out, please. This one I'm gonna direct over to Public Works, and to council. I am requesting that, Johnson Street be investigated, for one side only parking, and also Woodlawn Avenue, one side only parking. And what needs to be done to complete that request for an ordinance change. So that one would go to Rob and the chief, and I've already mentioned it to the chief.
What's this street? What's the second street? Woodlawn? Woodlawn?
Yeah, Woodlawn Avenue would be the north side of Woodlawn or the east side, depending on how you look at it, and Johnston Street, and that would be determined by the amount of driveways, you know, which side would be viable to restrict the parking on that would have less impact on the residents on that street. There's a lot of driveways, so, but it's a safety thing. I'm just, from what I see, is that it would be virtually impossible to get a fire truck onto that street from Crafton Boulevard with the way that the no parking here at the corner signs are, and even if they're follow the, I believe that the street is narrower, more narrow than the width of a fire truck. And we'll be looking at damaging borough equipment if they had to respond to an emergency on Johnson Street. And just one other item was that just to report that the police department completed their annual firearms qualifications this past week, and everything went well. And that's all I have.
I have a couple of questions for you, Mayor. Do we have any movement on the height question of vehicles? Is there anything that we need to do with the solicitor?
Well, at this time, the subject vehicle has not been spotted in quite some time.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm keeping my eye out for it. If it becomes an issue again, then we'll deal with it, but for now, we'll just kind of put it on the back burner.
Okay, sounds good. All righty. Moving forward to the engineer's report. The engineer has a presentation for us this evening.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I distributed, or I should say the manager distributed some worksheets and a timeline. The timeline is from, it's an old timeline that I found that Three Rivers Wet Weather had put together. There's only one correction there I'll point out in a minute. And I thought as we met in the engineering meeting last week, the request was to begin to exchange information to get both council and the residents to get more acclimated and gain a better understanding of the sewer systems and the obligations that you have legally and even ethically, and how we, just begin to get all on the same page. So I passed an information sheet out that I won't read it verbatim, but I'll just hit the highlights and the intent of each of the paragraphs. So this all started prior to 2002 as a result of both municipal and Alcosan sewer systems. They were in various stages of disarray and even failure. So it was leading to direct violations to the Clean Streams Act. So the federal government stepped in combination with the state and county government to develop and negotiate consent orders with the individual municipalities and find ways to stop the discharges of sanitary sewage to the environment. And that was between 2002 and 4. And in 2004 then, Alcosan and the subject municipalities, which were the customer municipalities, there's 83 municipalities that flow to Alcosan for treatment. Crafton is one of those 83. All of our sewage goes to Allocation. So they were given an order, and the municipalities were also given individual orders. That combined systems had a set of orders, and separate sanitary sewers had a set of orders. Now, remember that separate sanitary means that there's a separate system where sanitary sewage flows only, and a separate system that's parallel to it, usually where stormwater flows. Those are known as separate systems. A combined system is where the sanitary sewage and the stormwater is mixed. And that was a design criteria many years ago. It's no longer allowed to be constructed and designed that way. But there are combined systems, and they are allowed to operate as a combined system. So those orders from 2004 to 2010 boiled down, essentially had several requirements. You had to check the capacity of your sewers, which said how much flow can your sewers, every segment, how much flow can that segment transmit. You had to look at the conditions, so you had to televise every sewer segment, and you had to televise and inspect, and then you had to televise and inspect every manhole in the system. So one of the problems was that these systems were allowed to go into deterioration because there was no operation and maintenance being required, and therefore not being done by the municipalities. So the order required each municipality to operate and maintain, and mainly maintain, which is televise and find defects in the pipes and the manholes and fix them. So Crafton specifically spent millions, multi-millions of dollars fixing the dilapidated, failing, collapsed, and even broken sewer systems. And what that did, along with the other municipalities, is simply got us up to where the system should be to operate. So from 2010, the regulators deemed that, okay, the municipalities now had systems that were in reasonable condition to operate, and they were still discharging sanitary sewage to the environments. However, the first step through 2010 was just to fix them, and also to map them. That was another big deficiency. No one knew where the sewer segments were, where the manholes were. Therefore, you can't really maintain your system if you don't know how to get into a manhole or fix a pipe or to clean a pipe. So that was an expensive effort. After 2010, one of the things that the order was going to terminate by 2015, but one item in the order said that every municipality had to develop and implement an operation and maintenance plan. So the separate sanitary sewer systems developed that plan by 2010. They were all submitted to Allocation. They were submitted to the Allegheny County Health Department for review and approval. And the combined systems had a different approach. They're required, as part of their system, to operate a combined system, they have what's called a 9 minimum control plan. So within that 9 minimum control plan is an operation and maintenance plan requirement. So the combined systems then simply updated their operation and maintenance plans within the 9 minimum control plan, and those then were reviewed by the DEP and then adopted and implemented. So after 2010, when the whole cycle of all the sewers were fixed and all the manholes were fixed and everything was televised, and illicit stormwater flows, obvious illicit flows were removed, then it was time to let the systems go back into that cycle. So after the cycle of doing everything in the entire system, they said, okay, start it over and do it again. So that's what the operation and maintenance plan does. It essentially, yours as well as most others, require that every manhole has to be inspected every 10 years. Any significant structural defects have to be repaired within a year of when they're found. Every sanitary sewer segment that is considered non-priority, which are just small 8-inch pipes that are collectors in neighborhoods, they're not large priorities. Those are required to be televised and maintained once every 10 years. Priority sewers, which are usually larger diameter, carry a lot of flow, have a lot of customers passing through them, are required to be televised and maintained at least every 5 years. Now, problem sewers, chronic problem sewers, are required to be maintained on whatever effort it takes. So if there's a sag in the line and debris builds up, and in every 6 months it restricts the capacity of the flow, then we know where that segment is, and we continue to find them, but we know where that segment is, and it gets jetted or cleaned on some cycle. So the 5-year and the 10-year is out. It might be every 6 months, it might be every 2 years, we might cut roots every 3 years because a tree continues to grow and fill the sewer. So instead of cutting down the tree, you simply cut the roots on a maintenance cycle. So those are some examples of what the operation and maintenance requirement and plan are. Now, there's lots of ways to televise the sewers and inspect the manholes and even fix the sewers. So what past councils have chosen for Crafton is to utilize the SHACOG contract. And what that is a multi-municipal contract. Every year, Lou Gorski, the executive director of SHACOG, actually hires Gateway to develop a set of plans and specs, which are utilized year after year, and calls on the municipalities and says, hey, tell us where, in this instance, where your televising will be this year. So I mentioned 10% of non-priorities, 5% of priority sewers. You every year, you have a certain amount, relatively the same amount every year to televise. And so you would then submit that. Let's say I would do that, or Alberto would submit that to SHACOG. They would take all the quantities from several other communities, and then they would bid a large quantity contract for televising, and you would gain an economy of scale to do that. So instead of having a $30,000 televising contract, you're part of a $330,000 contract. So the idea is you'll get a lower cost per foot for a larger contract. Versus bidding it yourself, there's a lot of expense and effort, and you probably wouldn't get as good a price. Now, and that's something to talk about as well, because there's a break-even point where if you're 100,000 feet of a 300,000 foot contract, you probably can bid your own contract. You probably don't need to be in the SHACOG contract. So each year that would get evaluated, and I think in all the years, the manager, in most cases, would decide to go with SHACOG to do that work. So you would televise, let's say what we're televising this year, and that televising then comes back to Gateway. We review all the videos, every video that's given. There's a defect code as the camera goes down the pipe. They stop at every crack, every tap, every joint, every root, and they call it out. And there's a category. There's hundreds of categories for rating the defect. So it's a structural defect from a category 1 to 5, 5 being the worst. It could be an operation and maintenance defect in a category 1 through 5, 5 being the worst. So there's hundreds of categories. So these vendors go through that process. So they give us the video, and then they give us the database. And so what we look for then is mostly level 4s and level 5s, because those represent the significant structural defects that you're required to fix. Now, there's lots of other defects that are not getting fixed because there's just only so much you can afford, only so much you can do. So you'll always take the worst, which is the structural defects, and that's what you're obligated to fix from your operation and maintenance plan. If there's more money, then you look at fixing infiltration, where you might have what's called a gusher, where you would see a large volume of water coming into the system. We'll call those out, and in most cases they get fixed. So that would be done this year. And then whatever we generate out of that, all the defects that are selected based on the criteria and based on the budget, they're selected, and now we put out and we list a defect repair contract. So the defects can be fixed. Now we're talking about sewer pipes, right? Broken, sometimes collapsed, sometimes just badly cracked. So they can be fixed by just digging them up. You dig up a section, a 5 or a 10 foot section of pipe, you put a new piece of pipe in it, you put Ferncos on it, and you fill it back up. Or there is an in situ technique where they'll slide, let's say a 6 foot sock, it's impregnated with chemicals that will harden after the sock is expanded inside the pipe. It takes the form of the pipe inside, so there's no excavation, there's no restoration that's needed. And then that sock dries and it cures, it becomes even stronger than the host pipe that it's sealing or protecting or filling the cracks or whatever. But it takes the shape of the pipe. So if the pipe's egg-shaped and it's reduced in capacity, then the liner is going to be egg-shaped and reduced in capacity. But sometimes that's okay, but not always. You know, if it's a repair with only one house above it, it certainly doesn't need to be a full 8-inch pipe to carry one house. So, in any event, all of that's weighed, all of that's laid out, and that generates your defect repair contract for next year. So, by the end of this year, we'll know all the defects, we'll know the locations, we'll know the manholes that need to be fixed. It's all very defined, and it's all very specific. It's cost estimated, and then we bring that to your budget, and then the council decides on how much and what to spend, and then that work is done, whether it's through you bidding your own contracts or whether you go through SHACOG. That is generally the cycle of what happens where you spend the most of your money in your sanitary or in your combined sewer system. So, I took a long time on that paragraph, I won't take that long, but that's the brunt of a lot of questions are why are we doing repairs and why are we televising and how do we select each section to televise? And that's a whole new story because you might say, well, which 20% do we do of the priority sewers? How do they get selected? So there's that whole cycle. So that's all defined. We know each 5 years what section of the community is being done next, and that's based on when it was originally done, so that it's not greater than 5 years apart from the next round of televising. So it's not perfect, but it's close. You know, you might get a line that's 6 years televised. It might get televised in 3 years, just because you know you don't do one segment and then drive 20 minutes and do another segment. You know, you try to get it in areas in large chunks, and you get a better price from the contractor. So. That's essentially the description of what happened between 2004 and 2010, and then that cycle is then repeated through your operation and maintenance plan. So in your 9 minimum control plan is the O&M plan. You could read that, it's relatively straightforward. I mentioned 2, CCTV, and I mentioned defect repair, and I mentioned one other, mapping. There's probably about 20 requirements in that O&M plan. I told you 3. And those are the 3 most owners, but yet the others have responsibilities, and most of those are in-house. So a lot of that can be done in many cases with your in-house workforce to save the money from hiring a vendor or even a consultant to do. So there's lots of ways to get around those as far as trying to save money. So next was after the development of the operation and maintenance plan, and that implementation was ongoing. And is to be ongoing for eternity. So as soon as you finish the 10-year cycle and you've got everything televised for the second time over 20 years, you do it all over again. So next item, significant item, was what's called a feasibility study report. That was started in about 2011. They were submitted to the regulators in 2013. That's a very large, several half a foot thick document where it defines all of the work that was done, the analysis on all the segments that I told you about, capacity analysis. It also utilized flow monitoring to see what flows were passing through each segment. We were able to back calculate what the flow would be through each segment based on how many houses, the length of the sewer, the diameter of the sewer, and say there's 20 gallons per minute going into this segment, but it can only handle 10. So it's 100% under capacity. So that would fall into a category that says that pipe needs addressed. So it might be perfectly structurally fine, but it might be on a bad slope, it might be undersized in diameter, it might just be an old design and a development had latched onto it upstream of it, and so now the pipe is just too small to carry the upstream flows. So that's the feasibility study report, and that resulted in millions and millions of dollars worth of work that would need to be implemented in order to fix all the capacity issues. And fix, even that is not simple, because fix how? Well, fix it so that even a 1,000-year storm event could be carried? No, that's not happening. It's a 2-year event and maybe a 10-year event. That's about all you get out of a sanitary sewer system, unfortunately. So that rain that we had a few weekends ago, where it rained 3 days straight, steady, there was 8 inches of rain. That was greater than, it was between a 500 and a 1,000 year storm event, a design storm event. So no system, some sections of the system might coincidentally work, but no system will completely work during a storm like that. So whether it's a long duration, heavy storm, those are actually a little more friendly, but not a 500 or 1,000-year storm, versus the flash storms where you get an hour's worth of rain and you get 2 inches. Those are the most damaging. That's when all the flow comes at once. That's dumping a 5-gallon bucket into a straw. It just doesn't work, and it just goes everywhere, right? That's what we're mainly used to, is those heavy flash floods. So that feasibility study report only addresses, in the best case, a 10-year design storm. And the only reason for that is because that's what the regulators acquiesced to. You know, they couldn't say, well, it has to be an infinite design storm, because they know that that's impossible. So they eventually, after lots of back and forth, it's expensive, millions of dollars, like I suggested, for Crafton, just to get to the 2 or 10-year design storm. But if we get there, you're still going to have flooding and overflowing if the storm exceeds the design storm, right? That's one of the pitfalls of any storm or sanitary collection system. It can only hold so much, and you only have so much money to design it to a certain size storm. So, another long explanation, but that's an important part of everything we do when we talk about flood control, when we talk about fixing sewers, when we talk about budgets. You know, we've got to find the least cost ways to fix the sewers, and then there's that cost benefit. How large of a storm do we design for versus how much money? It could be 10 times the cost to design a 10-year storm versus a 2-year storm. It could be. Sometimes it's the same price. So all of those things get evaluated, and that's part of the cost-benefit analysis, and then the recommendations that we say, hey, it's going to cost this much per gallon to control this storm, and it'll cost this much per gallon to control that storm. And what council cares about is, what's it going to cost us total, how much do we have to budget, and where are we going to get the money? So that's feasibility. So you see how that's different than operation and maintenance. Operation and maintenance is keeping your system running correctly and keeping it from falling apart. And the feasibility study was a study and an analysis of the capacity. What can the system deliver? So that took us through 2013. 2014, Allocation submitted their wet weather plan. Now this is the big plan that affects the region. All the municipalities submitted their feasibility study reports to Allocation. So Allocation could see what the municipalities were going to do to fix their problems, so then Allocation could use that information to see what effect that would have on them to fix their problem. And their problems was treatment. They bypass, which means they discharge raw sewage into the stream every time it rains. That's how undersized Allocation's treatment plant is. Every time it rains, they discharge sewage into the stream. So that's one of their problems. The other problem is their delivery system. For example, Chartiers Creek, I think, is about a 3-foot diameter pipe. When they did the model for it, it needs to be about a 10-foot diameter pipe. So that gives you the indication of why things overflow, and Allocation has a really big problem too. So what happened, they submitted their plan, and all the municipalities submitted theirs. So the municipalities' cost, the total estimated cost for all the municipalities to fix all their feasibility study problems was $500 million, 500 million for all the municipalities. So Allocation came back and said, all right, we'll take that, and now we'll add what we have to do, which is build a much bigger plant and fix a lot of our sewers that are well undersized. They come up with 2 plans. The first plan, which was called the selected plan, and the reason they use that terminology, because if you're going, in order to comply completely with the order, with the consent order that they received, which is a water quality based order, which means they would test the water after certain rain events and would only be allowed to have so much fecal coliform in it, sewage in it. So in order to comply completely, it was $3.6 billion for the region. And that's including the $500 million for the municipalities. So the problem was they quickly recognized that the Pittsburgh region, these 83 municipalities, could never afford $3.6 billion. So they came up with another plan called the recommended plan, and that cost was just simply back calculated what could we afford and then what could we do for that money, and that was $2 billion. So 1.5 billion for Alcosan to fix their system, fixing quotes, because they weren't really fixing it, they were building a bigger plant, and actually that plan meant to do nothing in Chartiers Creek. Chartiers Creek doesn't get touched. That's how they were able to save money. So Sawmill Run, I think, was another one where there was no work to be done. So 3.6 versus 2 billion, and how did they figure out how much we could afford? The accepted estimate on what someone can afford to pay for sewage is 2% of your income. So 2% of what you make is what you're expected to pay. So that's based on a median income of each municipality, and then you take all of that and they'll do all the statistics through the 83 municipalities, and they come back with this region could afford 2 billion. Now, an affluent community could afford more, and a lesser, struggling community wouldn't be able to afford the 2 billion, right, the 2%. So in any event, that was just averaged out, and that's where they come up with 2 billion. They let a recommended plan, they submitted to the EPA. The EPA come back and said, well, we don't like the $2 billion plan, we like the 3.6 billion, because they're regulators, and that's what they want. They want perfection. And they said, but we get the affordability side of things. So we'll consider your $2.0 billion plan, the recommended plan, if you do two things. One is that you have to regionalize, you have to begin to regionalize the system. 83 municipalities with 83 systems, and everyone operating differently, and systems flowing into other systems and in and out. And this community does it this way, and then just downstream, this one does it this way. This has a 10-inch pipe, this has an 8-inch pipe. It's just helter-skelter. So they said, that has to stop. So they had certain criteria on the size of the pipe, and they said if it's a multi-municipal flow, then Alcosan would take that pipe over. If you got it up to just a normal condition, Alcosan, in an effort to regionalize, which is take all these larger diameter sewers, which are mainly interceptors, and there's lots of different municipalities flow in them, they would take those. And they would relieve the responsibility from the municipality. They wouldn't take any customers, they would only take the line itself. And so that was one thing that the EPA wanted from this region, is that you have to start giving up your sewers and regionalize. And so Alcosan stepped up and said, we'll be that agency that will take those multi-use sewers, and that's what they ended up, they're underway now with a program, and Crafton has sewers as well that are on the list to be taken over and absorbed by by Alcosan. And so that was the first requirement. The second was that the region evaluate source reduction. That's kind of where we are today. So all that O&M that I talked about just continues in the background, even though it's costing you $1 million a year. That's all, they just check that off and assume that's getting done. So now there's another burden being added, and that is the source reduction. So what that means is source flow is flow that's getting into the system that's illicit or illegal, that it wasn't designed to handle it. So obviously for a sanitary sewer system, when it rains, it should have no impact on the pipe, on the sanitary sewage in the pipe, because it's just flushing toilets and taking showers and washing dishes. Well, that's not what happens. When it rains, those systems block up immediately with leaking infiltration and inflow, which means it flows directly in through some illegal connection, and those systems get overwhelmed very quickly. So that was part of it, is to say, look, where is this flow coming from? Identify it and remove it. So that was their second requirement, is to begin to regionalize and study your systems and start identifying these areas of high infiltration and inflow and get rid of them. And so from a combined system, you would say, well, it's designed to take the stormwater flow. But what happened was, it was designed 50, 75 years ago to take on that flow. Since then, many things have changed. The Crafton Ingram Shopping Center, all of that flow goes into your system. That was never designed to take that flow when the system was designed, let's say, before the shopping center, assuming that it was. So my point is that those systems are not operating the way they were designed. So there is illicit flow. There's flow that wasn't designed to go in. So the combined systems have to do the same thing. They have to figure out where this excess flow is coming from and get it out. So those were the two conditions. The region said, hey, that sounds good. We'll get started on it. And the EPA is going to come back at some point and check in on us. And if we're not doing a good job, they're going to slap us with the $3.6 billion repair plan. And if we are doing a good job, they'll let us continue. So the next thing that happened is after all that came unraveled and was explained and sort of accepted, that was in 2014. What happened in 2015 is that the regulators issued a second order. So the first consent order went from 2004 to 2015. When that order expired, then a new order came out, and it was specifically for two things: to develop a source reduction study, which is just what I said, to evaluate where your high INI areas are and what are the projects that could be utilized to stop them. So it was to do a source reduction study and to implement a demonstration project. To go do something to show, so all 83 communities had to do something to show a different technique or a technique to remove source flow. So that's what was done. It expired in June 1st of 2018. So those orders just expired. So Crafton did a study. We did flow monitoring. We did flow isolation. We did smoke testing. We did all kinds of techniques to identify where all these areas of high infiltration are within Crafton and what are ways to simply reduce or eliminate that source flow coming in. So there is a study for that, and those projects are also millions of dollars. And once again, that's just building this toolbox of ideas and possibilities, but putting numbers to them so that you don't pick a $100 million solution. You might pick the $1 million solution, 4 of them, and then over time you would seek funding and spend $4 million to fix, your biggest bang for your buck, so to speak. So the idea is to just continue to gather all this information. The regulators never said, go implement these things. They said, just go study them. Well, you know what they're going to do someday. They're telling you to get all these ideas so they can make you do them someday, right? Like that's what's coming. So this order ended in 17, and if you've been at these meetings, you've heard me say that there's another order coming. So the second order, the source reduction study order, is over, and the next order is going to start, we think, in the beginning of the year. So the DEP is pulling the order together now, and what that's going to do is require limitations of flow. There's going to be targets that are established that you, as a discharge community, will not be able to exceed that you're sending to Allocation. So what that will mean is now you're forced to reduce your flow. So if your number is 10 and you have 15, then you've got to get 5 out. So go back to your feasibility study, go back to your source reduction study, and find that area where we're exceeding the target, and then we look at the projects, and maybe there isn't even a good project there. Maybe we have to look at it and study it again to come up with a different project to remove the 5 to meet that requirement, right? So that's the next order. They're going to start by requiring limitations of what you can discharge. Now we think they'll start off easy and give us 5 or 6 years to meet those requirements. Now, I threw a couple miscellaneous items down here, and what I'm talking about when I say that there's these flow targets, what specifically that is that Allocation was tasked to develop what these numbers would be. So when they got that requirement, they knew that if they start throwing limits on municipalities, there would be a revolution. So they smartly said, hey, let's get Three Rivers Wet Weather, which is an agency that represents all 83 municipalities, so that Three Rivers is looking out for the municipalities, and Allocation said, let's get a committee together and let's study what these targets would be. So ironically, a group of engineers that represent the municipalities helped develop what those targets would be. So needless to say, they're lenient, and it's going to get proposed, it has been proposed, and now we're waiting to see, when this order comes out, if they accepted what this committee had put together, and hopefully they do, because it's not a requirement to fix anything, it's a requirement to study the fix, which means if it's affordable and feasible, then you're gonna be required to fix it. But if it's not affordable, and there's definitions for that, the 2% like we talked about, and if it's not feasible, let's say it means, I don't know, tearing down all the buildings in downtown, you know, that's not feasible. So if it's feasible and affordable, then you would have to proceed with a project to get below the target so that Allocation, as well as individual municipalities, could begin to fix this problem of infiltration and inflow. So we'll wait and see what that order is, and the only thing we're waiting for is to see how strict it will be. So there's no thought that there won't be requirements for reduction. There absolutely will be. And one of the requirements is overflows. So when there's an overflow that is within the design storm, remember we talked about if it's a 2-year or 10-year storm, if you have an overflow during the storm that you designed to protect it against, that's a problem. So you're automatically, forget affordable and forget feasible, you're automatically required to stop that overflow. So that's a sanitary system. Sanitary systems are allowed no overflows. Combined systems are allowed to overflow, but very few and far between. For example, they're talking about limiting combined systems to 4 overflows per year. Right now, it's probably 50, 60, right? So it's still a massive problem with you know, the combined systems. So all of this is getting stirred around, and we're waiting to hear how hard they're going to hit the region and how aggressive they're going to be in making the communities and Allocation cut this I&I and stop these you know, overflows, which everyone wants to stop. Especially an overflow is considered anything that, any sewage that leaves the system inside of the design storm. And that could be a manhole that overflows, it could be someone's house, it could be any place that the system releases sanitary sewage, even dilute, because there's stormwater in it. That's considered an overflow. And like I said, combined systems are allowed a few, separate systems are allowed none as it relates to the design storm. So that's one item I talked about. There are standards. I mean, it would take a while to go through 85% capture and all of that associated with you. We'll say that for another day. Just realize that this next order for next year is going to be investigating, evaluating, and fixing problems that are feasible and affordable or that create an illegal overflow. Okay, one other thing that Allocation established a grant program in 2016. It's called the GROW grant, and they have $85 million set to spend over the next 10 years since 2016 to give the municipalities a percentage of the project that eliminates or significantly reduces inflow and infiltration. So in order to qualify for that program, which you already have at least one grant, I know of one for sure, no, there's 2. So there's engineering analysis and flow monitoring and you know, to justify what you would estimate to get out. And then based on what flow you think you can get out, then they award a grant. So it's anywhere from 25% to 85% of the project cost. So there was a project that Crafton did even before the grant program came out that we were able to get reimbursed from. So they actually paid back for a project that was done 2 years prior to their grant, which was in their guidelines that we submitted for and was able to get that money. And it actually funded your next GROW grant as well as the grant that they got you. So it funded your portion of that second project. So in any event, that is something that we continually focus on, and we try to drive everything to some quantification of this I&I so that we can get qualified for getting money from the grant from Allocation. And then just lastly, to summarize it, is just that Alcoasyn continues to work with the municipalities to take over the sanitary and combined lines, and then to meet the minimum criteria to have flow from more than one municipality. So that regionalization, that sort of definition of regionalization, that's continually happening. And the regionalization process is underway. I don't think they've taken over a pipe yet, but the agreements are written and they're begin to be distributed. And as they say, the devil will be in the details as to what they want or what they need or what we might want them to do versus them not wanting to do, right? Like there might be a problem if they say, yeah, we see this problem, you're gonna get it fixed in year 2080. We might say, oh, wait a minute, we're not gonna give you the pipe to wait 60 years to fix the pipe. We'll just keep it and fix it ourselves, right? Just a random example of why you might not give them your pipe. So, that's it. I did include a timeline, which talks a lot about what I had said. The only really, I think, error, this was a Three Rivers timeline. If you look at that, the blue bars are CSO, and then those burgundy, the green is both CSO and SSO. But if you look under submit non-minimum control report, that says 2005, I think that was 2009. So that's really the only correction on that timeline. So, that's a lot, but it gets everybody up to, from a bigger picture perspective, where we are today, what we're expecting, all the information we have so far, all the projects and cost and tools and experience and data. You know, there's just so much when it's time to start fixing, which is going to be soon. Sure, there's no questions after that.
Well, I have a question.
Okay.
So as we see our neighbors apply for these grow grants and they're conducting their projects and we're going towards separation as a whole, the reduced flow, what is being done at the planning level to ensure that our separation efforts aren't having unintended consequences with flooding in the stormwater systems?
Yeah, that's sort of the responsibility of the municipality, meaning you shouldn't design a separation project that's going to flood the stream. The good news is that streams are they have so much capacity versus a closed pipe, right? A 10-inch pipe can only carry that much. A stream, you know, has a very large capacity. So discharging stormwater flow from a 10-inch pipe into a stream, it's not quite spitting into the ocean, but it's not a massive impact. But it absolutely has to be evaluated. So that's part of it, but the Grow Grant doesn't care. They'll pay you if you get the flow out.
Right, so specifically, we learned that in Green Tree, that they're separating poplar. And I believe they're disconnecting leader lines from their combined system and putting into from what I understand, the president of Green Tree set a 40-inch storm line that's on the city of Pittsburgh side, and that line, from what I understand, makes its way to Crafton, and we've been seeing more inflow down by the Idlewood station, because as you know, it goes from a stream to a pipe, and we have flooding. So, with that being said, you know, I believe this community doesn't want to negatively impact its downstream neighbors, and it'll be important for the community to come up with efficient and sustainable ways of managing the water versus just discharging the water into, a downstream community like we've seen upstream of us in Bridgeville with their flooding issues. So we certainly don't want to create the same type of issues. So simply discharging the water and getting out of the system probably isn't the most effective, or maybe the most effective means per gallon to get it out of the system, but there are other external costs
No
to
doubt.
that. So
Yes.
the community as a whole needs to understand, if we choose a more expensive option, it's really per gallon or per dollar per capita better to
Of overall effect.
overall effect.
That's right, not just one effect, which might be increasing capacity of this combined system. It
Right.
might be mitigating or eliminating the damage as a result of adding that stormwater to a stream that may already be over capacity.
Yeah.
So,
So I just ask that we as a community be mindful and work with engineer to be mindful of those cause and effects as we move through our planning, and that we work with Allocation to help them understand why we may choose a project that's a little more expensive if it means, you know, we mitigate these externalities.
yeah, the greater overall good
Yeah.
versus just the individual, yeah. Yeah, that's a good point.
Just one small comment. So through your whole presentation, you've talked about separated systems and combined systems. And I just wanted to make sure that we state for the record, for people who don't know, that we have a combined system.
Yes, good
Thank
point.
you.
100% combined in Crafton, that is how it's designated. There may be some sections that aren't perfectly combined, but yet you're known as a 100% combined system, yes.
Preliminary wise, we have identified a few or a couple projects, and that we need to put more projects in the pipeline to begin writing the applications to get these projects funded. So we need to do more study to ensure that we're being most effective. Is that correct?
That's sort of the second part of my report. I just wanted to mention that that we've been working on and came up with some ideas along Crafton Boulevard, where we have some thoughts on separation as well as discharge to the stream, to get it completely out of the system and discharge it to the stream. So these are conceptual ideas at this point, but that's what I believe you're talking about, is that right now we focus there because we know we have issues there. We have folks, you know, saying that there are problems with the system, and we have a lot of data right there. So it was easy to expand out a bit and pick up some more data to come up with some concepts. The next step would be then to look for other regions like this, other areas where it would be suited to separate and then discharge to a stream. So that's sort of the lowest hanging fruit, right? You don't want to separate an area that's heavily populated with homes and by installing pipes for miles long and disrupting the neighborhoods, and then spending a lot of money to take a flow 2 miles away to a stream. You would want those to be close to streams, and you want them to be in areas where you're collecting a lot of flow, like say the Crafton shopping center, just using that as an extreme example. So yes, that's the second stage of what we're doing. We presented a couple concepts and ideas at our engineering meeting last week for Crafton Boulevard, and now the next stage is to begin to look at other areas like this, where they will be well suited for separation.
Now, can grow money be applied to properties that aren't held by the municipality? So let's say the shopping center, for instance. Is there a way to work with the shopping center, or how does that work?
If that flow gets to our system and we find a way to remove it, and that could be the private-public relationship agreement, if they would do something, they might even be able to be reimbursed as part of the project. So yes, anything's fair game if it comes to our system, and that flow does eventually come to our system. So that is on the table as it relates to what options there could be to separate, or like one of your other projects, which is a rain garden, that it slows and absorbs the flow and keeps, you know, it eventually overflows back into the combined system, but it takes that initial flush and it holds it and stores it and infiltrates it versus just discharging it right to the pipe. So there's many different types of flow reduction techniques. Separation's one, and then infiltration's another. So there are lots of techniques, but yes, that technique, that cost, and the grant percentage, those are all elements of what's the best bang for your buck to get flow out and at your cheapest price.
All right, and with regards to Act 167 that the Allegheny County passed, and we're gonna be asked to work on an ordinance here for the Borough of Crafton, do you have any immediate concerns or suggestions for the borough as we move forward with the solicitor?
We've reviewed many, all of our municipalities have, you know, we know their existing stormwater ordinances, and the Act 167 is a stormwater control ordinance. So it's not sanitary sewage, but it's basically based on redevelopment or development. So when communities come in to develop or redevelop, and not communities, businesses want to redevelop or develop, there's a new set of standards of how much water they have to hold back. And this is to protect the streams like we talked about, so that there's not too much water. Forget the sewer system, forget this combined sewer, though some of those systems might get directly discharged to the stream. So large areas of pavement or buildings or driveways, all of that water goes directly to a stream. So Act 167 says, hey, if you're gonna develop, then we're gonna require a more stringent stormwater control, which means you have to hold more flow back, you have to put it in a tank, you have to put it in a pond, there's techniques that have to be done. So the Act 167 requires minimum guidelines, and those minimum guidelines are probably more strict than your current guidelines. So you're probably going to be making your stormwater ordinance more strict, and you're required to do that. You're required to follow the model ordinance that the Allegheny County and the DEP approved and put out. So what you can do, though, is make it more strict if you chose. So that's part of the analysis of what you'd want to look at is, what are they requiring and what do we think we should require? And sometimes you can look at different districts, like if there's certain areas that are affected by surface flooding more than others, you might tighten that restriction on that certain area. So yes, those are all, you have until December 1st to issue your order or your ordinance, but lots of things to look at as it relates to, how you might want to go with that.
Thank you, Engineer Minsterman. Does anybody have any questions from council? No. So, the manager and I plan to have another session to further educate the public and council, and we're gonna be looking at some of these areas that are gonna be priority to help inform our capital improvement plans for the borough. So I hope this first session was informative, and we continue to look forward to our planning efforts to update our ordinances and ensure that any redevelopment or greenfield development meets the requirements set out by the county and by Allocation. So stay tuned, and we hope that we see people attend the planning commission meetings as well, because some of these discussions will happen at that venue as well. So, thank you.
Welcome.
Alright. So moving on, we'll have the Solicitors Report.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dovetailing off of Engineer Minsterman, it's almost as if you read my memo without receiving a copy. But what I've done in this memo, in section 2, which is entitled Stricter Ordinance Provisions, is I set forth a handful of issues that council should consider tightening up, making more strict, as it were, as it relates to the model ordinance. This is a lot to digest, and we do not have to make a decision tonight, and I do not necessarily want us to have a discussion. I suggest you take a look at it. We have 2 months from this point to adopt an ordinance, and I would suggest that we have a discussion in our October meetings about some of these stricter standards. Maybe the engineer has some suggestions as well, and we can put it all together to put an ordinance together for the borough that is going to be helpful in the short term and the long term with respect to stormwater issues. The memo does have the form model ordinance attached for you to look at. We have very little on the books by way of stormwater management for developments. We were not part of the first push about 10 years ago to adopt stormwater. We weren't in one of the covered watersheds at that point. So although we do have stormwater management provisions in our subdivision land development ordinance, they are certainly not as extensive as other communities that were covered in separate watersheds. This model ordinance will tighten that up extensively, but there's still some other issues that I have implemented and my firm has implemented in other communities that I suggest here that you should consider. Does anybody have any questions on that from this 36,000 foot perspective?
I think it's gonna be important that council, as I read through this, understand the difference between an MS4 community and a combined.
Yeah, we are combined.
Yeah.
So, one thing I will say is if you're reading this and you have any questions or concerns, please call me, email me. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm sure the engineer would be available to answer questions on this.
Get copies of that, please.
Yeah, as well. So, I have an extra one. Next on my list here is the draft revisions to the nuisance ordinance and the tree ordinance. That's chapter 131 is our nuisance ordinance, and chapter 208 is our tree ordinance. From a sort of a 36,000 foot perspective, what this does is it takes the private nuisance tree issue that is currently dealt with under the tree ordinance and the shade tree commission and moves it into our nuisance ordinance so it can be addressed in a more efficient and a quicker manner than the system that's set up under the shade tree commission. It does not change the shade tree commission's ability to regulate and handle shade trees or borough-owned trees that are in the rights of way. But it does allow us to move more quickly if there is a dangerous or diseased tree that would be a public nuisance. So what we did is we added a definition in public nuisance that included diseased or dead trees, shrubs, etc. We did also provide the code official building inspector the right to investigate complaints of nuisance trees and issue appropriate enforcement actions therein. And then again, under the tree ordinance, essentially remove the nuisance process and because it is now being addressed under our nuisance ordinance. So that's it in a nutshell. Happy to answer questions. I know there's a motion later in the agenda, and maybe that's the appropriate time to ask questions.
I think so.
I worked with the manager and with Mr. Lavasser, president, on this ordinance, so it was a team effort.
All right.
That's all I have.
Thank you. We have a presentation this evening from Allegheny Greenweb. Mr. Rosario, would you like to introduce the speaker?
Sure. Today we have Laura Lynn Fabian. Hope I say your name right.
Yes.
She's presenting from Allegheny Greenweb though about trails and connecting all the trails throughout the whole Allegheny County and trying to incorporate Crafton into that as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Were the files?
I am eminently,
If not, I have hard copy back.
give me a second. Boom, all right, there we go.
It's on one page or one.
Does this look like the first?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, I'm gonna see if it works from over here.
Okay, great. Yeah,
I'll come
that's
back for
just
this.
4 slides. And then is it better if I speak into the microphone or should I stand over here?
I think everybody can hear you if it's
Okay.
easier to stand by the presentation.
Yeah, great. And I'll just set this right here. So yeah, first of all, thank you so much for giving me some time out of your busy agenda tonight to come in and introduce myself and talk about this really exciting initiative for the county region. As Abby said, I am Laura Lynn Fabian, and I'm the coordinator on this initiative called Allegheny Greenweb. And actually, a special thank you to Abby as well for inviting me in here tonight, because this will be the 3rd time that you will have heard me talk. Because Abby was present at the ALOM conference and heard an hour-long presentation, and then he was present at the Shar West board meeting and heard, and that's when I heard this in. So, but this will be much quicker. But, so in a nutshell, the Allegheny Greenweb, we are a coalition of over 30 plus and still growing nonprofits and relevant government agencies, mostly in the sectors of environmental conservation and outdoor recreation. And we've united under the past couple of years under a vision to see an interconnected trail and greenway system come to fruition for all of Allegheny County. And really the intent of that, we see it as kind of that green web, not a green web of new internet, but a green web of trails and greenway connecting all of our publicly accessible open spaces and regional trails, connecting all 130 municipalities to those assets. And we see that as a benefit for both outdoor recreation opportunities as well as alternative transportation opportunities. So the idea would be you could come outside of your home in Crafton and either walk or bike to Settlers Cabin Park or over to Emerald View Park, maybe down to the Panhandle Trail or a future shared use path running along Chartiers Creek, right? So, also too, the alternative transportation aspect of commuting to work. So coming outside your home in Crafton on a Monday morning and leaving the car at home if you choose, and walking or biking to work downtown, or walking and biking to transit as well. And also too, we know that those are some tall tasks, but at the very least, we're also just from an advocacy standpoint hoping that in outreach like this, we can build awareness of the need and excitement for new connections in our communities. So a little bit more about our coalition. We are privately funded through RK Mellon, so there's no public dollars going into this process at this time. That's paying for me as well as our professional consultants, environmental planning and design. So they're one of the kind of top comprehensive planning and environmental planning firms in the area. So we're really happy to be working with them. And as far as what we're actually aiming to do, how we're looking to be of service to communities, we have 5 ways. We're first looking to build a first of its kind inventory of trails and greenways for the region, which, believe it or not, doesn't exist. At least one that's definitely complete and accurate. So this here might be a little hard to see because it's a little faded, but this is the county comprehensive plan map for trails that was adopted about 10 years ago, but this says 2018 because they've tried to keep it updated over time. And this, as you can see, is at a very much 10,000 foot view, so to speak, regional level, and shows the 9 county parks as well. And can you hit that to the next slide, please? Maybe. Thank you. Oh, just one back. And so one of our first tasks as a coalition is we took that illustrative map from the county comprehensive plan and put it into GIS so that we have a living, adaptable map for us to use. And so the first idea is let's work with communities who are interested in this to cross-check and see if for your community, do we have the right inventory? Are there trails and connections that we need to add? Is there anything that we need to remove so that we can get that complete, accurate baseline so you can promote to your residents how they can currently connect to open space today and have a baseline for future planning as well. And then if you want to move on to the next slide, please.
Fingers crossed, this one.
And then the second purpose is, in addition to getting that baseline, which should be feasible to do and would have a high impact, the next step would be to collectively build a vision for the future. So where do we want to go next? How do we want our residents to be able to connect through new trail connections in the future? What gaps are there in the system? So building that vision together. And then actually I'll talk about this just a little bit. So the analysis that we're doing with environmental planning and design, we're creating some analysis that we can bring to communities as a jumping off point as we have this discussion. So we've looked at places in the region that have lower wellness comparative to other resident areas in the region, as well as what we're deeming mobility deserts. And these are the communities that are in close proximity to regional trails and parks, but it's really hard to connect to those areas by foot or bike. And looking at how we better connect those places to the regional trail and park system. And then if you want to go to the last slide, please. We're also looking at creating a thermal map to have rising up to the surface corridor, great corridor options for connecting our deserts with our green oases and cherished green places. So internally, as a Green Web coalition, we are rolling up our sleeves, putting pen to paper, and using that analysis to deem some good corridor options for new trail and greenway connections throughout the region. We're hoping to then bring that to communities through the COGS when that's ready and get input on that. And the last way we're looking to be of service is simply what I think sets us apart than if we were just the county coming in and saying we're going to do an update to the county comp plan, which is what we're hoping this will lead to actually, is that we want to remain a coalition when this action plan is final and not have it just sit on a shelf, but work with communities like Crafton to get priority projects implemented, because the members of our coalition are the experts in the region for trail planning and design and implementation and maintenance, and they know where the resources are out there for conservation projects, and they're the experts in grant writing and such. So yeah, so that's it. Thank you very much. I'd love to just know if you're interested in this initiative, if you would like to meet one-on-one offline to talk more about, you know, the analysis for Crafton specifically, and talk about your current and future needs, and also see if you might be interested in joining a Char West COG working group for the Allegheny Green Web to move this planning process forward next year.
Okay, so just a informal raise of hands, and Alice, you can just say, aye, are you interested in moving forward?
Yes.
All right, so,
Yes.
all right.
Yep.
I think we're all good.
We're good.
Great,
Glad to hear.
All right,
wonderful, thank you so much.
all right.
Thank you.
Mr. Rosario, the manager, will be taking the lead on this initiative.
Mr. President,
Yes.
comment.
Yes.
We have some analysis of the trails in Crafton already, and even some ideas to connect them. So there was a study done, I think, 2 years ago, that we can resurrect and get that in your hands to evaluate.
Great.
That'd be great.
And Three Rivers Wet Weather is a member of our coalition.
Okay.
All right, thank you. All right, moving on down the agenda. Turning the page to our business agenda. Under administration, a motion to ratify resolution number 2018-11 adopting the 2019 minimum municipal obligation as required by Act 205 for the police pension fund and non-uniform police employee pension fund.
So moved.
Second.
Hearing any discussion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
All that opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, so, just one sort of, note under the administration section that ties into, ratifying resolution number 11. So this was something that was discussed about a month ago. Every year by September 30th, we have to certify basically the minimum amount that we put into our pension plan every year. The state requires us to do that. So this was something that was done by our actuary in August, and I think, the council just wanted to give me some time to, you know, get in my seat and take a look at it and make sure that everything was good to go. So that's why that was placed on this agenda. Now, the next item, I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware that the state aid funds that tend to come in around this time of year are currently being distributed, and so 2 transfers have come in since the last meeting. One is the General Municipal Pension System state aid for a total of $131,162.87. That puts us 4 cents below our municipal, minimum municipal obligation, so we'll be putting another 4 cents into the pension fund to meet the numbers from the previous year. So if you see, you know, a transfer to be signed off on the list of bills for 4 cents, that's what it is. And just FYI, coming up next year, our MMO was a little higher this year than it was in previous years. A couple different reasons for that have been communicated to us. One is, I believe there was a larger payment made out to one of the members. I'm still trying to figure out exactly what happened. I think there may have been death, not totally certain. But Also, at the beginning of the year, the markets were not doing quite as well as they were prior years. So, depending on how your pension funds are invested, that can affect basically how much you are obligated to put in every year based on, whether you got as much of a return the previous year. So, I'm in contact with their pension plan administrators. I'm comfortable that they're doing a good job keeping an eye on everything. But that's just, the way of the market sometimes. And so I will make sure to keep you updated around this time next year as to how much the state aid is compared to, what we're required to put in, and what that transfer will be. So the second one on there that I have is just volunteer fire relief allocation. That's something that comes from the state, and we pretty much just have to sign off on it saying, yes, this is going to the fire department. That's for $25,721.61. If you have any other questions, happy to answer them.
Alright, so compared to the budget, are we in good shape relative?
Yeah, so this year, basically you just kind of budget for whatever your MMO amounts are, and since the state aid check was of such a size that we essentially had to put nothing in, that worked out
So
great for
that
this year.
covers both police and fire?
Yes, so, and that's listed on the resolutions that are passed every year. We do the minimum obligation for the police pension and then for the non-uniform, and that combines to make your total.
Second.
Not fire, it's the.
No, not fire. Did I say fire?
He did.
Oh, I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Harassers.
Oh, I should have,
Right,
I should have
and fire.
clarified.
So
Not
fire
fire.
is separate.
Fire is separate, yes, unless anybody that has like a publicly paid fire department,
Mhm.
that would be included, but volunteer fire, no, that's the second separate transfer, that's just state aid that they get. And we kind of just have to act as a pass-through for them.
Yeah, I would, sort of an interesting point to make, so, in the event that we have a paid volunteer, or a paid fire department, we would have a different calculation.
Yes.
Okay, alright, that's important to know. Alright, thank you.
Yep.
Moving forward to Public Works, we have a motion to approve pay application number 2 in the amount of $106,684.29 to Independent Enterprises Incorporated for the 2018 road program as recommended by the Borough Engineer.
So moved.
Second.
So, this is not the final pay, so I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page, and we're working with the engineer, director of public works, and the manager to ensure that the punch list is being taken care of.
And when will that be taken care of?
I believe that we have the meeting on Wednesday.
Engineer Minsterman, do you have any concerns?
Nope, it's all standard stuff. I'm not sure, Rob, I'm not sure if we have your comments. Does Alberto have the comments from you on the questions? Okay, pretty much standard stuff, so shouldn't be a problem to
The
get everything
handicap
resolved.
ramps across Highland and Linwood are gonna be changed or left like they are?
They're gonna be installed, they'll come out
Are
and
they
put
gonna
those
seal the
A lot of,
asphalt?
a lot of the punch that has to do with filling the transitions between the streets, the curb line, all the way down Linwood. They did the one side of it to both sides. The center line all has to be sealed. There's a number of issues that have to be addressed and all have to do with the sealing.
Because I know the dirt hasn't been filled yet and bricks haven't been cleaned up.
There's a whole list of them.
A lot of- yeah.
I mean,
So all items on the punch list are achievable and should be resolved.
yes.
Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All that opposed?
No.
Please note the no vote stands. Moving forward to planning and zoning, a motion to advertise ordinance number 1649, amending chapter 131 of health hazards and nuisances and chapter 208 trees regarding the regulation of nuisance trees located on private property.
So moved.
Seconded.
Do I hear any discussion?
Yeah, I have a question. So in Steve's summary, he indicated that part of the motion would allow our code officer to ascertain whether or not the trees are diseased and whether they can be cut down. Is that correct?
Yeah, code and building inspector.
So I'm guessing that would include season, correct?
That's correct.
Yes.
So what, like, fail-safe do we have to prevent, she's not an arborist. Where do you get into the guy or gal is saying, my tree needs to come down and, there's some, she's not sure and it becomes a gray area of whether.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so I can elaborate a little bit on a couple things regarding this. One is, I don't believe that we specified exactly in the changes, we will call an arborist, we will this, that, but we're still kind of following the standard operating process that we had when we were just going off of the tree ordinance, which is that we would tend to call an arborist. There are a couple different people that we have that can come in and examine the tree. The reason that we developed this, suggestion to amend these is because, we've had some issues where there were residents that had private trees that were of concern, whether they were a nuisance and a health hazard to life and limb. And when we looked at the nuisance ordinance, it kind of seemed to suggest that any condition of a property that was immediately dangerous could be enforced under it. But then, of course, we have the tree ordinance, and the purpose of the Shade Tree Commission is to regulate shade trees, street trees, which are not trees that are located in somebody's backyard or the side of their property or whatnot. So this is really more of a clarification thing, so that we understand that we do have the ability to enforce under a health hazard a tree on private property using the same procedures that we would have before.
Can I chime in with one issue is, if there is a call that needs to be made that either the code officer or the building inspector doesn't believe they can make, there's nothing in the ordinance that would prevent us from engaging an arborist to come and make the call.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that we're gonna put Susan or whomever is in her chair in a situation with an irate resident. And, I understand why we're adopting this, and I support it generally. And I think, given the last couple meetings we've had, it's probably due. But, having someone from the borough go down there and not be able to make a call about a tree and then suddenly say, well, it looks pretty sick to me, let's just cut it down. I'm worried about, the process there is what I'd like to see more clarification on. So, from my point of view, there's nothing in there to prevent, we don't have anything in here saying that, we need to go through an arborist, or we need to go through a third-party tree service to make sure that the thing is really sick and we're not just kowtowing to resident pressure on somebody.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, I think that although we do not say the words, you must use an arborist, we are permitted to do so if it's a close call. I mean, the story I heard about the trees that were at issue at the last few meetings, it's pretty clear that those trees were dead. So, I think that's a call that we can make. And for many of these situations, the issue is such that you want to make a quick decision, because the only reason it becomes a public nuisance is if there's an immediate threat to health, safety, welfare, or property damage, and not just because you don't like the fact that there's a dead tree in your neighbor's yard. So I don't really think that, I understand your concerns, but I think that it's able to be addressed if there's any question that a code officer or the building inspector isn't willing to make the call, unable to make the call, not sure about making the call. We have an ability to call in an expert to tell us whether the tree needs to come down or not. So.
Yeah, just a point of order. Actually, that tree that was in discussion at the end of the street, where I know the gentleman has been there a few times, there was a discussion between Susan and myself to actually have an arborist come in and certify. Some of the estimates that I received from the council president, we contacted those tree vendors to see if they were actually registered arborists when they made the determination to cut the tree and gave the estimates. So code enforcement itself does follow the proper protocol. And we wouldn't have cut the tree down without assurance from an arborist, professional arborist or certified arborist that it was dead.
Which, for this one, we did bring one in.
Yeah, I'm just saying, if that's what we're gonna do, we might as well just put it in writing, so we can't skip over that in the future. I see my time. I see the floor.
Does anybody else have any questions, concerns? Does anybody want to amend the proposed ordinance?
To include what Mr. Kraus was talking about.
Yes.
The process is already that we're doing, and see, why not, though?
No, it's not.
Do you have any?
No, I mean, there's nothing in the tree ordinance now that says you have to bring an arborist to do it, so, I understand what Mr. Kraus is saying, but from a legal perspective, there's nothing in here that would prohibit us from engaging an expert at any time when making these determinations.
So if the borough has to cut one down because it's a liability, then can they come back and say that tree really wasn't dead or?
Say, the borough wouldn't cut it down unless somebody, it wouldn't be a liability unless it was documented that now that it come from the arborist. The Shade Tree Commission could ask us to do that, and they've asked Public Works to remove some trees that were in borough property, borough land, and we did do removals. They were obviously dead, we removed some of those leaves, falling to roots. But I don't, the borough itself wouldn't direct anybody to cut a tree down that looked like or appeared to be alive or without any certification from an arborist that it was dead.
Yeah,
It was a disease.
I think the point being is like, we haven't, this and, when we put it under nuisance, it becomes a matter of expediency. So all normal avenues of recourse of going through the magistrate's office really are eliminated because again, it's a public nuisance, it's a health hazard. So the criticism that we received this summer was our ordinances were not streamlined enough to be effective in mitigating immediate hazards. So we could word the ordinance to require that any, I mean, we could have an arborist on call. I mean,
But we don't need to put that, that doesn't have to be the law of the borough.
Right, does it not obligate us to do it in every instance?
Pretty much.
Right.
I would, this is what I would say, is that in these situations, when somebody goes in and makes that assessment, if they think, Rob or sees and believe it's dead, you probably would want to have an arborist come in and confirm it, to sort of paper the file and button up any liability issues. But we don't go in right away and say, it's dead, we're gonna cut this down. We send a notification to the property owner that says, you have a dead tree. And if you disagree, you have a way to appeal. We're sending them a notice of violation. If they don't abate the nuisance in 10 days, then the borough has the option of going in and taking the tree down, going to the magistrate, even filing an equitable action in common pleas court to get an order of court requiring someone to cut down the tree. So I don't really, I still don't think that we need to put the words arborist in this ordinance in any way, shape, or form.
so just to clarify, in the event that a tree is found to be like an imminent threat and we have to take an emergency action,
We can do that.
and I think that's what we're trying to address through the revision.
Okay, I hear that. So I'm just concerned that, we have a situation that, someone comes down and is upset, and rightfully so, and wants it done, and we cut something down without the due diligence. That's what I'm coming from, but if Steve says it's cool, I'm generally, I'm not a lawyer, so I tend to listen to one, so.
Good.
Right. Do I hear any other comments?
So just for point of clarification, the motion is just to advertise. We're not passing this ordinance.
Correct, this is advertised. But if we're gonna advertise it, it's as it reads today.
Okay,
So if we're going to amend it, we should amend it now. So we're, in accord here, we're gonna move forward with as proposed.
Yes, and I'm assuming there's already guidelines that go through though, and we have to take down a tree though.
Those guidelines are currently being revised and written actually, and agreed upon by the Director of Public Works, Code Enforcement, and the manager. So there's gonna be a streamlined process that we can demonstrate, we can show the public, this is the workflow, this is the business process that we are going to have at the Borough of Crafton, so it's uniform and applied fairly to everybody in the borough.
And will those guidelines have the arborist, like a section, was an arborist consulted?
They can. I mean, that's something that, in the past, when we have involved the Shade Tree Commission on private trees, which are technically not part of the Shade Tree Commission's purview anyway, their standard procedure is to call an arborist in when you want to take a tree down. So we have continued doing that in the couple private trees that we've had to enforce. I assume that that will remain part of our business process. I think we have a couple that are pretty easily accessible, that it shouldn't, at this time, hurt the 10-day timeline. You know, but our real goal with this is just, if a limb is gonna come flying through somebody's bedroom window, we can deal with it faster than 30 days, which was, you know, if we just did it in standard tree procedure, now we have a 10-day window, basically, to do the same thing.
Right, and it gives code the authority, which
Yeah.
before they didn't. So to address your concerns, Mr. Kraus, the manager will have a policy document in hand while, on the day that we pass the ordinance.
Thank you.
Consider.
Consider. All right, I'm gonna move forward, if everybody's all right. All in favor?
Aye.
All that opposed? Motion passes.
Did you announce
Is it Al?
She's no longer.
Mr. Rosario.
Sorry.
She's no longer with.
Sorry.
All right,
So that was a 5 to
Yes.
all right. Make sure I'm reading where I was. All right, on personnel, motion to hire Lori Dawson as part-time substitute crossing guard as recommended by the chief of police.
So moved.
Second.
We hear any discussion
Is this person replacing what season was at the time, or
there?
I'm sorry,
this is replacing season's position, or?
can't answer that. They had a vacancy, I don't know
Oh,
who
okay.
left.
Okay,
Yeah, from
So
my
they're still in a vacant slot.
okay, that's fine.
Okay. Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All that opposed? Motion carries 5-0. All right. And moving forward, we have our community announcements, Recreation Board appointments. There's letters of interest to serve on the Recreation Board are being accepted through October 12th. There are 2 positions that are coming available. Residents can submit a letter of interest at the Borough office directly or via mail attention to the Borough manager, or attach as a PDF to the manager's email address, rsusco@craftonborough.com. We're going to have a Meet the Manager tailgate, October 8th, weather permitting, at 6 p.m. in municipal building parking lot. As again, so this immediately prior to our council meeting. So hope to see everybody there. We'll have beverages and some snacks for the meeting. And we're gonna move forward with the Chartiers Creek cleanup, September 29th at 10 a.m. Manager, do you wanna go into that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So, this is an organization that reached out to me, last week. They're gonna be called the Lower Chartiers, Watershed Association. Basically, their goal is to just, maintain clean conditions, along the Chartiers Creek, watershed, which goes all the way down to Washington County. I think we're considered part of the lower watershed. And so this is sort of a volunteer association that will do cleanup and maintenance of the grounds and things like that to make sure that it's, continues being a safe recreation area. So they asked me to just sort of distribute some information. There's a letter of introduction to the council that you can find on your council drive for this meeting. And they just asked me to announce that on September 29th at 10 a.m. they would be doing their first cleanup event. It is a sort of canoe and kayak cleanup, from what I understand. I neither canoe or kayak, so I can't really tell you too much about how that works, but that's how they're billing it. And you can get more information on AlleghenyCleanways.org in their event section. They have several different cleanup type events listed. This one's at the top since it's the next one coming up.
All right. And then there's a hard to recycle collection event. Is that being held by the county or who's holding that?
I think it's by the county, since it's at Settlers Cabin Park, which is another one of the flyers that came through. And for any flyers that we mention on here, we usually try to keep a handful of them over at the table where the sign-in sheet and everything is, so you can grab one if there are any left on the way out, or feel free to contact us. We can send one out tomorrow. But yeah, the hard to recycle is kind of things that are considered e-waste. Not large TVs from what I understand, but smaller appliances. You might want to check the flyer just to be sure for all the different materials, but sometimes this is like the household hazardous waste type materials are the things that they take. All right, for that.
And that's October 6th, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Settlers Cabin Park. So I imagine it's near where the Christmas tree recycle is. So, moving forward, we have the additional citizen comments, beginning with Mr. Wacker.
How you doing?
Hi. Name,
Glenn
address.
Wacker, 1478 Crafton Boulevard, 34-year resident of Crafton. And I have a property, 1654, which is given a condemnation notice. I'm really glad you're here, sir, because the curb systems are owned by Crafton Borough, not the state. Any state-maintained road, curb systems you own. Anyway, long and short of it, one weekend, about 10 years ago, 3 inches of rain poured down, blew my foundation and ruined the house, basically. And I had limited income at the time, and I couldn't do much but rebuild the foundation, which I did. I haven't been down there much too late. I had to take care of a sick, dying mom, and I have working at I got a job now, federal employee with the government. Anyway, I get a condemnation notice that someone went down. They didn't even give me a notice in the mail, hey, you got a problem or anything like that. And so they put, White Felton's his name. Sir, you, Mr. Kasarowski, you're the ordinance officer, is that correct?
Yes.
But anyway, that didn't even notify me. I called him, he said to come down and talk with the borough. So, hey, the councilman, I am here. You've cost me $200,000. It's a different faces, a lot younger faces here for council members there, but put me in a hole big time, you know. I had Dick Scringer, pretty familiar with Dick Scringer from PennDOT. I went on highway system. He's the one that educated me in the fact that you own the curbs. And he was a nice guy. He had someone come down and just repair my curb system for me. But then the damage is done, yeah, big time. So now, I don't know what I have to do, beg? I really don't know what to do now at this point, you know? You know, put me in the hole big time financially. I hear it's pretty litigious because you're talking about tightening up your ordinances and everything like that. Hey, for the money that I never got for the income I lost, you should like cut all people's trees down for free. You should have someone doing it because it's all one-sided. You don't take care of your end of the bargain. But I pay out taxes. My taxes are paid on property. I use it as storage because I didn't have a garage. I don't know what to do here. You know, I'm kind of upset about the whole bill because it's not an idea. There's limitations to what I, as a resident, a homeowner, can do. I used it as storage. I didn't live in it. So perhaps you guys can advise me what to do. Because the White Felton told me to come out and talk with you. So I'm here.
All right, thank you.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mangan?
Yeah, James Mangan, 96 3rd Street. So once again, we're back again to ask the same questions. The alley, Perrin Alley, that is kind of guiding more water into the already burdened sewer system. So have you guys been looking into that? Is he informed that that repair is now directing more water into the system that can't already bear it? And then a question for you, I guess, is the money that's allocated to us or potentially offered to us through Allocation, is that a limit per area, or is it just first come, first serve?
There's no limit.
Okay, so like they could apply for as much money as they possibly can, and then use that to make repairs as needed. So I guess my follow-up question to that is, how diligently are you guys going to go after that free money, really? That's pretty much what I have.
Thank you. Mr. DeCaro?
Greg Duker, 92 Starrett Street. As James said, we're just following up again on sewage. Again, as James said, Crane is completely just dumping water back into the sewers. There's a 12-inch curb now that water used to run into the woods, which is now directing it back into the sewers. And just kind of wanted to follow up on last meetings. Again, we asked what's going to happen. We've provided you guys with numerous complaints that it's a chronic issue in our area. It's not an isolated issue. And again, I'm just trying to figure out how we get answers. We gave you a signed letter from multiple residents between Starrett, Barr, and Hall of multiple floodings over Joyce Borgana has been 50+ years. So, Mr. Engineer, we've shown that it is not an isolated incident on June 20th. It's been a chronic problem in our area for, as Joyce is saying, 50+ years. Some complaints have been lodged with council or borough, and you guys are saying there's nothing. So we just want to know what we can do moving forward. Thanks.
Thank you. The public comments will be addressed by the correct parties at the borough. I think that about sets the agenda for this evening. Oh, go ahead.
I have one last comment. We have been informed that someone has a birthday tomorrow, and we'd like to wish the president a happy birthday and present him the cake. Just kidding.
Well, at that rate, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
So everybody is